Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. Welcome. Pour ouvrir notre sommet, j'aimerais inviter sur la scène l'aînée Claudette Commanda. To open our summit, I'd like to bring to the stage Elder Claudette Commanda.
Good morning. Are we happy this morning? Kwe Sheba. Larry. Kwe Sheba. Menogishigun. Bon matin tout le monde. Good morning everyone. Is it not a beautiful day this morning? And you know why it's beautiful? Yes, because you're all together. And you know why you're all together, and you know why you're beautiful, and you know why you're going to make the world a better place? Because you're going to take on the challenges. You're going to be progressive. Because of the work that you do, each and every one of you, you are leaders. And the work that you are going to do for the communities, and the work that you do as leaders is to make this country the best country for our children and our grandchildren. Would you not say this? Right? Because each and every one of you, you have that spirit to take on challenges. And let me tell you, my friends, we all know that we are facing many challenges, but through strength, courage, and belief, and support, and community spirit, you overcome challenges. And I know that the future holds many promises for our generation who are not here yet. So let's put our hearts, our minds, our spirit, and ourselves as one in this community of progressive leaders, because you are all leaders. I'm always honored to be invited to do the protocols of the Algonquin people. So this morning I began with that first language of this land, the Algonquin language, and I said, Kwe Sheba, good morning, my friends. And Kwe Sheba also is a blessing, because the sun is shining, we are living, we have life, we have health, and we have one another as brothers and sisters. I begin with the next protocol, and I say, Mi gwej ni wichki weidug, mi gwej ki bija yego ma nongum. Kani michki jigun kinu in addition to cause kitagan zibi don jaban. Bijajiko ma, and ishnabe ki umama wininiwag. My name is Claudette Commanda. Je suis une femme algonquine de la Première Nation de Kitagan-Zibi, et je suis toujours fière pour donner des mots à bienvenue. Bienvenue ici à le territoire non cédé de nos ancêtres de la nation algonquine. I'm always honored and I'm always proud to represent the ancestors that I come from, to represent the community that I was born and raised in, and where I raised my children and grandchildren, and where my relatives were born and raised and are laid to rest in the land of the Algonquin people. So I welcome each and every one of you beautiful, beautiful people, brothers and sisters and friends. I welcome you to this beautiful homeland of the Algonquin people. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As I acknowledge the ancestors of my people, the Algonquin ancestors, Ni Jenwen Daganago Mama Weneniwag, I recognize and I honor the ancestors of Indigenous peoples from coast to coast to coast. And I honor and recognize all your ancestors. But for our ancestors, we would not be here. So let's take that moment in our heart to reflect where we are from, who we are, and let us give honor and thanks to our ancestors and be proud of who you are. Let us put our hearts, our minds, and our spirit and our voice together as one to acknowledge the beauty of life. And I have been past that sacred medicine of tobacco to ask to come here to do this welcome blessing. To greet you, I greet you with a good heart, a heart of respect and love. I welcome you into the homeland of my people, the Algonquin and Anishinaabe o Mamawininiwag. And I will say these words as a blessing for each and every one of you and your families. This work that you are doing here today and tomorrow, and the work that you are doing in your communities, and the work that you will continue to do together as one, as a strong community of progressive leaders, to ensure that you take on the challenges and that the challenges are overcome with kindness, with strength, with intelligence, with wisdom, and a good heart, and to be that beacon for this country. Yes, you will have challenges that you will have to face. Yes, you will have good discussions, and please have those. Use that gift that you were given, the gift of voice, your gift of intelligence, and offer your words. In order to overcome hard times, we need to have dialogue, and let us have that dialogue. So my brothers and sisters, as I give thanks to the Creator, I invite you into this prayer circle, and you can say your prayer in the way that you believe, in the way that you are comfortable. We do not impose our ways on anyone, but we certainly welcome everyone into this moment of reflection. And the words that I will speak are one of a heart of belief, of kindness, generosity, and love. For those of you who want to stand as this prayer is being said, you're more than welcome to stand. For those that want to remain seated, you're more than welcome to remain seated. In our lodges, we sit upon Mother Earth. We do not stand in our lodges. And that is why some of us remain seated when prayer is said. But for anybody who wants to stand, you're more than welcome to do so. You're more than welcome. Don't be shy. Because at the end of the day, prayer is from our heart. Prayer is that communication that the Creator has blessed us with. The word in the Algonquin language for prayer is emiyawin. It means to chant, because we always sang our prayers. And we still sing our prayers when we are in our lodges. I'm not going to sing, because I'm not a singer. Because if I did sing, remember the Gong Show? Somebody would come out there with that and pull me off stage, so I'm not going to do that, all right? So let's come together, brothers and sisters, with that one voice, that one heart, and that one spirit. Let us give our thanks, and let us ask for that help, guidance, and courage to face these difficult times, to come together and have good dialogue, and come together to find those good solutions. And if you have a prayer for a family member, a colleague, a friend, and even for yourself, say that prayer, because we do believe that prayers are heard by Creator and all those spirits, and we do believe that prayer will be answered. For indeed, there are all those spirit helpers. Miigwej gishiminado kichimiigwej onje kakina kichimiigwej. Miigwej gishiminado kinakego oh chimiigwej. Miigwej gishiminado onje ikwewag ashishinininiwag. Gishiminado anabagis nibuksendam Mashkawi wizin, Nibakawin, Manajita wawin, Nashishpi madzwin onje, Oma nongo mashishwabang, Onje kakina. Nabagis kokamisug, Nabagis mishomsug, Daspin again. Nibuksendam, Widokawado duinunji kakina. Nibuksendam, Chiminotagzuin unje nongum, Ashishwabang unji kakina. Migwedge Jojoiki, Migwedge, Mishomis Kisis, Migwedge, Kokomistipikizis. Kishiminado Kichimigwedge unji, Nibi, Nodin, Ishkude, Ashisheki. Great Spirit, as we come together, Creator, I give you thanks for all the people who are here. We thank you, Creator, as brothers and sisters in the circle of prayer. We come to you, Creator, with that one heart, that one mind, that one spirit, and that one voice. And we give you thanks for all of your creation. As we give thanks to those great grandparents that you've blessed all peoples of the world with, our grandmother, the moon, our grandfather, the sun, we also give thanks to our mother, the earth. We thank our grandmother, the moon, for her light that shines upon us each and every night, so we may see our sister, the stars, and the bloodlines of Mother Earth continue to flow. We give thanks to our grandfather, the sun, whose breath warms us each and every day and shines his light so we may see the beauty of creation and to see the beauty in one another. We give thanks to that great mother that you've blessed all peoples of the world with, our mother, the earth, and we give her thanks for all that she provides, from that water life, the plant life, the medicine life, the trees, and including our relatives, the animals. We give thanks for all of creation that is above and all that creation that is below. Creator, we also give thanks to those four sacred elements that you have blessed us with. Without these four sacred elements, no life would sustain. That life and that gift of water, that first creation, that gift of air, and that gift of fire, and the gift of land. We thank you, Creator, for these blessings. Creator, as I offer my words to you and to the ancestors, I ask, Creator, that the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the four directions come into this meeting to bless and help one another here, and the good work that is being done, Chinago yesterday, today Nongum, and tomorrow Wabang. Creator, it is my prayer for everyone who is here that you bless them with good words to be shared, wisdom to be learned, respect to be shown, kindness to be given, and love to be upheld. And we thank you, Creator, for those great gifts of life, Pimadzuin. We thank you, Creator, for that great gift of love, Zagieduin. And Creator, we thank you for that great gift of being together as brothers and sisters. Chimiigwed Kishiminado, Kichimiigwed Onje Kinuin Emiawin, Ashish Ninuin Emiawin Onje, Nichkiweiduk. Thank you, Creator, for hearing this prayer. Thank you, my friends, for giving me this time to share with you words of welcome and words of blessing. I wish you well. I know you're going to do a good job because you just could feel that energy in this room, an energy of kindness, an energy of love, an energy of courage, and an energy of that movement to take on what those challenges and those good solutions you're going to come up with. And just remember, self-care is important. And when the going gets tough, take that moment, reflect, see your strength. Take that moment to give thanks to your ancestors. Take that moment to get yourself one hell of a good cup of coffee. And I do believe there's good coffee here, right? Would you not all agree with me? So just get that Starbucks and just remember you are the stars and you're gonna buck this meeting and be progressive. Take care, love you all, miigwech. Thank you, miigwech.
Thank you, Elder Commanda, for welcoming us to Ottawa and grounding us in something deeper than the political headlines, reminding us all of our roots, whether in our ancestry on these lands or in our shared movement. Merci, Claudette, d'avoir ouvert notre conférence d'une manière aussi réfléchie et inspirante. Your words remind us of what truly matters, our relationships, our responsibilities, our communities, and our ability to build something better together. Whether we are First Peoples, settlers, or newcomers to this land, we each have a role to play in shaping a more just and a more united future. That work of reconciliation, of solidarity, is at the heart of what brings us together today.
Bienvenue au sommet sur le progrès 2025, faire face aux crises aujourd'hui avec courage. Welcome to the 2025 Progress Summit, daring to take on today's crisis. Je m'appelle Gabrielle Brassard-Lecourt, je suis présidente et cofondatrice du média indépendant Pivot et je suis ravie d'être avec vous aujourd'hui pour animer ce sommet. Il n'y a pas de meilleur moment pour se rassembler entre progressistes. Les crises se multiplient, logement, climat, inégalité, montée de l'extrême droite, et en pleine campagne électorale, on constate que les réponses qu'on nous propose ne sont pas toujours à la hauteur.
Exactly. That's why we're here. I'm Jared Walker. I'm the vice chair of the Broadbent Institute's board of directors, and I'm excited and so stoked to be one of your MCs for this year's summit. This summit is a space for courage, not just to name the crises we're facing, and, we're facing a lot, but to imagine a better future and organize towards real solutions. We're here at a pivotal moment. A federal election campaign is obviously underway, and across the country, people are making big decisions about the kind of government that they want. In moments like these, there's so much focus on what divides us. But this summit is a reminder that we're stronger when we act together, across communities, across languages, and across generations. Over the next few days, we're going to ask some tough questions. How do we push back against the far right? Not just in our politics, but in our communities? How do we win real gains for working people and make progress that stands the test of time? How do we tackle the climate emergency in a way that leaves no one behind? How do we protect and strengthen the public services that people depend on, like healthcare and education? And how do we build a country that works for everyone and not just the privileged few?
Et surtout, comment on bâtit du pouvoir ensemble? Entre syndicats, mouvements citoyens, communautés autochtones, partis politiques, journalistes, artistes, universitaires. Ce sommet se veut un lieu pour réfléchir, pour apprendre les unes des autres et pour créer des alliances qui durent. Et c'est exactement ce dont on a besoin en ce moment.
You'll notice that the summit is bilingual. Sessions will be in English or French with live interpretation available throughout. If you have not picked up your headset yet, now's the time. They're at the table near the registration. You just leave a piece of ID and you'll get it back when you return the device. Our first session includes both English and French speakers, so please don't miss out on any part of the conversation. We would also like to thank our platinum sponsors, CUPE, Meta, UFCW, Amapsio, and the United Steelworkers, and our incredible title sponsors, Action Network and the Canadian Labour Congress, for contributing to this convening of our progressive movement.
Et maintenant, pour lancer officiellement le sommet, accueillons sur scène la directrice générale de l'Institut Broadbent, Jen Assum. Depuis 20 ans, Jen fait partie de celles qui construisent, qui mobilisent, qui transforment. Elle a dirigé plusieurs campagnes avec succès, a aidé à syndiquer des milieux de travail et contribué à des politiques publiques importantes pour tout le monde.
Jen is a strategic thinker, a fierce organizer, and someone who always brings clarity and hope in the face of complexity. Please join us in welcoming the Executive Director of the Broadbent Institute and our homie, Jen Assum.
Good morning. Let's give it up for Jared and Gabrielle. This is their first time emceeing the summit. Salut tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. And it's just so great to see everyone. Welcome officially to the beginning of the Progress Summit 2025. You know, we are such an interesting group of people, aren't we? The broadbenters that show up each and every year, the new folks who made the decision to come here this year. You know, one of the things that unites us is we don't just believe that there needs to be change, that another world, another Canada, a better Canada is necessary, but we have the audacity to believe that it's possible, that things don't have to be the same way. And I know that everyone in the room are people who, with their hearts and their minds, not only know this, but they act upon it. They aren't people who just talk a big game on Twitter or a virtue signal over here, but they're people who take real world action in order to make the world a better place. So let's just get a little bit of sense of the energy here. I feel like a lot of us were at the party last night. So, no, I'm seeing some denial in the front. No, us? No, never. That doesn't sound like us. I feel like there's been a million elections since we last saw each other. Who here in the room knocked on a door in one of the last elections, or even this current one? Let's give it up. Let's give it up. That's right. We're people who want to talk to other people. So what about people who are doing issue advocacy? Things that they're passionate about, and we need to talk to one another. We need to talk and educate with one another. I'm seeing some issue advocacy already, some organizing, right? People who are meeting in community or who are working in coalitions of communities. So let's put our hands up. Let's give a round of applause. Let's do that. Oh, and last but not least, and Lord, this is how I had, one of my starts, is if you are in the labor movement, you're a shop steward, or you're at the representative level. You're someone who is like every day in the workplace or serving people who are in the workplace. You're looking out for your brothers and sisters, their health, their energy, the fairness on the job. That's tough. So let's give it up if you are being a representative in your local union and you're here today. And also in the room joining us, of course, every year, this is the third year we've been running this program, is the Emerging Leaders Program. So every year we have about 20, although this year it's the largest group ever, 25, people who are from across Canada, have an array of backgrounds, who are socially situated in different parts of the progressive movement, who come together. And so let's give it up. Let's stand up. I know it's early still, but stand up if you are an emerging leader in this cohort, or you're returning. You are back. Yes, Akuba, thank you for standing. Yes. And let me be real with you. The choice to do real world, real in-person conversations or organizing, it is not easy. It is not easy. People who, like all of us in the room, like we have stepped up to these roles out of our hearts or our minds logically, but it's not easy. We're doing this at a time in which, best case scenario, people do not want to talk about politics. And the worst case scenario is that they want to talk a lot about politics and they've bought into some misinformation. Or they're forgetting the main root of the entire question. Which side are you on? Like they've missed that thread. And so we're trying our best to put the pieces of the puzzle back, to be working where people are at, to be uniting at a time when there's so much that is trying to crush and divide. So this summit is for all of us. It's a time to check in, with where we're at, what we're hearing, where we see the opportunities are to connect and to unite. And so like a quick story of, for example, what I'm talking about. I don't live, big secret, I don't live in Ottawa, I don't live in Toronto. It's good, being the executive director of the Broadbent Institute. A lot of people think I live in those bubbles. But I live in southwestern Ontario. And for years, I'll be driving around and there'll be a Trump flag, a Make Canada, or a Make America Great Again hat, or a T-shirt or something, and that's just my community. That's where I am. But let me tell you, those flags have come down from those flagpoles, right? I'm not seeing those hats anymore on those folks at the hockey rink when I'm bringing my kids to the hockey rink. And it's more than just recognizing what Trump is and what he's doing. And I don't know if you're seeing this too, but there's an opening here, a reconsideration of who are our allies, where does Canada belong, what kind of economy do we want? These are really, really big questions. Because one of those flagpoles, I saw a Mexican flag go up it, right? Like there's something happening where people are really reconsidering Canada's place in the world, what our economy is, and how we need to come together. So, in fact, to the point where a girlfriend organized a little coffee note, and she's like, "You're political, we'd love to," and then someone said, "There's a group called Progress Toronto, maybe we can make one here," and that's great. That's a great question in my, in the small city that I live in. So people are starting to give the bigger picture, and that gives me hope. And we as leaders, we need to be there and patiently helping people who are maybe have taken down the flag, but they have some other questions. Like, let's be patient, let's work with people, and let's help them through this reorientation. So folks, these challenges aren't going away. We're dealing with cost of living that is still out of control. We're dealing with a housing crisis, a healthcare system that's hanging on by a thread. And so we need to be continually talking about these issues and taking real-world action on them. And that's why we chose this year's theme, daring to take on today's crises. There's a lot of them, and they're interconnected. And it's not just a slogan, it's a call for action for organizers, activists, policymakers, everyday Canadians to meet this moment with, in that spirit, in the spirit that Elder Commanda began with us, in unity, and use our intelligence, use our hands to be taking action. Because let's be real, we can't do this alone. And it's not going to be one segment of this progressive movement that we find ourselves in that's going to do it alone. It's interconnected, and it's going to take all of us together. So there are so many amazing sessions at the summit. And every year I have to sort of give it a little bit of an overview, so I've picked just a couple to hype. The first one, I'm so excited, is the panel of people who are actually in the room at the table for US-Canadian trade negotiations. So that's going to be this morning, featuring Steve Verhoel and Beth Baltzan. And those insights that we're going to learn are going to be the real deal, sometimes shocking. But we need to know. We need to know, well, what is it that is being discussed? What are some of the things that we need to learn strategically moving forward? This afternoon, we'll have a performance from Juno Award-winning group, Snotty Nose Res Kids. I know. I'm so excited. I'm really excited for that. B. Brusk is going to be having a conversation with labor leaders about how we are standing up united to the bully in the South. And tomorrow morning, incredible speaker, Stacey Davis Gates from the Chicago Teachers Union. And she's going to be talking about an incredible work that their union have been doing with community organizations in Chicago to be advancing public education and the uplift of communities. It is incredible. And then, we also have Matthias Ecke, who is the socialist representative to the EU in Germany. And he's going to be also giving an intervention about what things are like in Germany, a little bit about what's happening in the EU, and I'm delighted to learn and hear more. So, folks, this is a stacked summit, and I hope that you use this time to recharge, have these kinds of conversations, find these kinds of openings. How are we going to take this moment and help people reorient their thinking, right? Work with where people are at. The forces that we're up against, they're real. And the power when we act together is also real. So thank you so much for coming. And I guess, let's see. I'm trying to look at the notes here. I'm like, is there anything I missed? No. So thank you so much for coming. And let's dare to have these real conversations and start to organize. Thank you.
Hey, y'all, before we jump into today's program, we just want to tell you about a special activation happening throughout the conference, the Collaborative Timeline of Progressive Economic Policy. Throughout the day, we invite each of y'all to contribute your thoughts, your experiences, and your ideas to this unique crowdsourced timeline, which captures the impact of progressive economic policies in Canada, both past and present, and will help shape the future of our economic landscape. Here's how it works. On large post-it boards upstairs, you'll find space to write about your personal experiences with progressive economic policies, anything from workplace changes to national initiatives that have had an impact on you. And don't stop there. There's also a section where you can add your ideas for the future, policies you'd like to see implemented, and help us move forward. The timeline will be available throughout the day, and at the end of the summit, we'll photograph it and we'll digitize the whole thing, making it accessible to everyone via QR code, ensuring the conversations and the ideas that we spark here will continue to resonate beyond this event.
Nous avons hâte de découvrir les récits, les idées et les réflexions que vous allez apporter à ce projet. C'est une occasion d'apprendre les unes des autres et de mettre en lumière les solutions audacieuses et efficaces que proposent les politiques économiques progressistes. Alors, en explorant la ligne du temps, nous vous invitons à contribuer, à réfléchir et à connecter avec d'autres personnes tout aussi passionnées par la construction d'un avenir plus juste et équitable.
I mentioned upstairs, so let's make sure y'all have the lay of the land. The main plenary summit programming is down here on the main lobby level, but anything happening in the Grand Salon or the Chaudière room is up on conference level C. The mezzanine level is just one floor above us, and that's super important because that's where you will find breakfast in the mornings, and the economic policy timeline, and the Action Network booth. As I always tell my family before holiday dinner, please add travel time to get where you are going. This is especially true if you are taking the elevator to get there, as anyone who was at last night's reception can attest. Washrooms on this level are near the hotel reception and across the hall from the Grand Salon room on conference level C, and all gendered washroom is located on mezzanine level M.
And of incredible importance, coffee. Coffee stations and lunch will be all located in the lobby area. Lunches are served to-go style, so grab your food and make your way back to the rooms for programming or find a spot to take a break. For today's lunch, the Grand Salon upstairs is a quieter place for a break. If you haven't already, make sure to download Whova, our conference app. This is where you can find the schedule, speaker bios, and send messages to other attendees. Just download it from the App Store or Google Play and enter the event code Broadbent 2025, and you're good to go. The app is also where we'll make announcements when things change or need adjustments, so make sure you turn on notifications. If you run into trouble with the app, visit the registration desk located in the lobby or find a volunteer who can help you. Vous êtes vraiment les bienvenus à partager vos meilleurs moments sur ce sommet sur les réseaux sociaux. Nous le ferons aussi. Vous pouvez nous trouver sur Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Instagram et LinkedIn. Nous utiliserons le hashtag Broadbent 2025. For online Wi-Fi access during the summit, log in to the network Progress Summit and use the password Broadbent 2025. We know not everyone was able to attend the summit this year, which is why I want to encourage you to share about the event on social media. Let's bring these ideas and conversations to the doorsteps, kitchen tables, and social media feeds of Canadians across the country.
The summit cannot operate without the amazing group of staff, volunteers, sponsors, and partners who made this event happen. We want you to get to know them. So, if you are a part of the summit staff team, raise your hand. There you go. If you're a volunteer, raise your hand. If you're participating as a sponsor or a partner this year, raise your hand. Right on. Hand raised or not, each and every one of you is a part of our community that we cherish so much. So thank you for being a part of this year's Progress Summit.
Le Sommet sur le progrès est une occasion d'analyse, de recherche de solutions et de formation au leadership. C'est un espace où on peut explorer les questions urgentes qui préoccupent les progressistes au Canada et dans le monde entier. As we enter 2 days of thoughtful programming with lots of big ideas on the agenda, it is so important that we all do what we can to make sure everyone has the best experience possible.
As there will be discussions of social issues that have a real-life impact on our communities, it's natural for attendees to have strong feelings and differing perspectives. However, to ensure the summit continues to be a safe and welcoming space, all participants are expected to abide by the Progress Summit's Code of Conduct and Mutual Respect. This Code of Conduct and Mutual Respect identifies the standard of behavior expected of all event attendees, including participants, speakers, staff, volunteers, observers, guests, media, and others. You can find the 2025 Progress Summit Code of Conduct and Mutual Respect on the app, in your email, and on the Summit website. We encourage all participants to understand its expectations and the safety mechanisms we have in place, and to just generally be kind to one another.
As part of the Broadbent Institute's commitment to a welcoming and inclusive summit, I also want to draw your attention to 2 staff resources available to summit attendees. Je veux vous présenter Heather Brunet et Galia Bravo, des personnes importantes de ce sommet. Elles sont nos coordonnatrices en charge de l'accessibilité et du soutien à toutes et tous les participants. Heather Brunet et Galia Bravo are back for another year, focused on ensuring our summit's accessibility. Heather and Galia are available to support attendees that experience barriers to accessing, navigating, or participating fully at this year's summit. If you have a concern related to childcare availability, dietary restrictions, inaccessible spaces, or any other barrier you may experience, please connect with Heather and Galia. Both Heather and Galia are available, if you would like, for peer support during programming hours. If you encounter an issue or are concerned about a situation, Heather and Galia are here dedicated to helping in those situations and directing your concerns to the appropriate staff member. They can be found at the registration desk or reached by phone.
We also have quiet rooms for when folks just need some space and quiet away from the stimulation of the summit. They are located at the Cartier and Bytown room on the conference level. Et sur ce, j'ai le plaisir d'annoncer la première séance de la semaine, Dépêche des lignes du front. To lead us in the first session of the day, Dispatches from the Frontline, we welcome to the stage Saman Tabasinajad, the Executive Director of Progress Toronto, an organization that's been at the forefront of municipal organizing and electoral victories in my hometown in Canada's largest city. Joining her is Maeve Villan, City Councillor in Jean-Mance, Montréal with Project Montréal, and with me, a member of the Broadbent Institute's Board of Directors. Give them a hand, please.
Thank you, Jared, and hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to be back at the Progress Summit and especially to be sharing this stage with Maeva Villon.
Hello, everybody. Bonjour, tout le monde. I hope you have your headsets because this session is going to be bilingual. Alors, aujourd'hui, on va parler de notre sujet, faire face aux crises d'aujourd'hui avec courage. Le courage de s'organiser, de bâtir des mouvements justes, d'une société équitable et inclusive.
This year's theme is bold. Daring to take on today's crises calls on all of us to believe that another world is possible. And it's not just possible, it's necessary. Each year, the Broadbent Institute brings together organizers, advocates, and everyday people who are doing that work on the ground, fighting for housing, justice, climate justice, worker power, and real democracy. For those who are not familiar with Progress Toronto, we're a nonprofit advocacy organization building a more democratic, just, and progressive city. Through campaigning, training, and our election work, we help residents and organizers take action on the issues that matter most, from housing and public services to racial and economic justice. We helped elect progressive leaders like Mayor Olivia Chow, and we've also just recently helped defeat far-right candidate Anthony Furey in the 2024 by-election. Our work empowers people to push for real change at City Hall and beyond. And as we co-host Dispatches today, I'm reminded that the people you're about to hear from are making real impact. They're shaping a more equitable future for all of us and for their communities. These are our dispatches from the front lines.
Ce matin, nous avons l'honneur d'accueillir 4 femmes leaders qui, chacune à leur manière, participent à construire un avenir progressiste. Pour commencer, je vais vous présenter une collègue fantastique, la mairesse de Côte-des-Neiges Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Gracia Kozoki-Katawa. C'est la première femme noire à Montréal à occuper un poste de mairesse d'arrondissement. C'est une ancienne infirmière en santé mentale et une gestionnaire dans le réseau de la santé, et elle apporte une perspective très précieuse et une action de terrain fantastique pour la transformation sociale. Bonjour, Gracia.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je vais faire la présentation en français ce matin. Alors, c'est vraiment un privilège pour moi d'être avec vous aujourd'hui au cœur d'un rassemblement qui est vraiment nécessaire pour qu'on puisse rassembler nos énergies, nos ressources entre forces progressistes au Canada. Je tiens à remercier tout d'abord l'Institut Broadbent pour cette invitation. C'est une première pour moi, alors je suis vraiment, vraiment heureuse d'être parmi vous ce matin. Oser s'attaquer aux crises aujourd'hui. Ce thème résonne profondément en moi, pas seulement comme élue, mais aussi comme femme, comme citoyenne et comme infirmière. Mon parcours personnel est tissé de solidarité et de résilience. En effet, je suis originaire de la République démocratique du Congo. Ma famille est immigrée au Canada lorsque j'avais 3 ans. Ma famille est spécifiquement originaire de l'Est de la République démocratique du Congo. Pour les personnes qui suivaient l'actualité ou qui connaissaient un peu l'histoire de la région des Grands Lacs, vous comprenez que c'est une région qui est marquée depuis plusieurs décennies par des guerres qui sont créées pour être en mesure de mieux exploiter les ressources naturelles. Et les femmes, en fait, le viol des femmes qui est utilisé comme arme de guerre de façon systématique depuis des décennies. Alors, très tôt, j'ai réalisé les injustices qui pesaient sur les miens qui étaient restés là-bas. Et de là est venue ma volonté viscérale de contribuer au bien commun et de briser les barrières qui empêchent aux gens de vivre dignement, tant là-bas qu'ici. Cette conviction m'a d'abord menée vers le soin, parce que pendant plus de 10 ans, en effet, comme la collègue l'a dit, j'ai été infirmière, clinicienne au chevet, puis gestionnaire dans le réseau de la santé à Montréal. Au chevet de milliers de patients, jour après jour, j'ai vu la souffrance, la maladie, mais aussi la grande résilience humaine. Mais j'ai aussi vu autre chose. J'ai vu les causes profondes, les déterminants sociaux de la santé qui amenaient les gens à nos portes. Et de là, j'ai voulu trouver une façon de pouvoir avoir un impact encore plus concret sur la vie des gens. C'est-à-dire que dans le quotidien, j'étais heureuse d'être en mesure de soigner la population, de littéralement sauver des vies chaque jour, mais je me disais, mais comment est-ce qu'on peut faire pour avoir un impact encore plus grand sur la santé des populations? Donc, cette volonté de contribuer quotidiennement au bien-être des populations, c'est la raison pour laquelle je suis devenue infirmière, mais aussi c'est la raison pour laquelle j'ai fait le saut en politique municipale spécifiquement en 2021 pour devenir mairesse de l'arrondissement de Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, ce sont les mêmes raisons, en fait. Parce que, finalement, ce que je veux, c'est prendre soin de la population. Mais j'ai compris que pour vraiment prendre soin des gens, bien, il faut agir avant l'hôpital. Il faut agir sur l'environnement de vie, sur l'urbanisme, sur les services de proximité. C'est là, au municipal, sur les lignes de front du quotidien, que nous pouvons vraiment faire de la prévention et améliorer durablement la santé et le bien-être de nos communautés. Alors, aujourd'hui, quand on parle d'oser s'attaquer aux crises, bien pour moi, ça commence là. C'est-à-dire oser voir les liens entre nos choix collectifs et la santé de nos concitoyens, concitoyennes, oser agir en prévention, et ça, même quand c'est difficile. Je veux vous illustrer, en fait, le quotidien de ce travail à travers quelques crises fondamentales que vous allez bien reconnaître. Et les crises dans un arrondissement comme le mien, qui est diversifié, qui est vibrant, mais aussi qui est marqué par les inégalités, on les vit de plein fouet. Je vais vous parler un peu de l'arrondissement de Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce à Montréal. Tout d'abord, c'est l'arrondissement le plus populeux de la ville de Montréal. Donc, on parle ici de 185 000 personnes. On parle de 135 langues parlées dans l'arrondissement. Donc, c'est aussi un des arrondissements les plus diversifiés du Canada. Ce sont des niveaux de vie différents. C'est-à-dire, j'ai à la fois des citoyens qui sont peut-être un peu plus privilégiés, qui m'ont dit, quand je cognais aux portes durant la dernière élection, vous savez, moi, je vis ici depuis 50 ans, en effet, dans des maisons qui valent des millions de dollars, mais c'est aussi des personnes qui vivent à l'intersection de plusieurs facteurs de vulnérabilité. Et tous ces gens vivent dans le même arrondissement. Et mon rôle comme mairesse, c'est de m'assurer que chacun et chacune d'entre eux, qui soient arrivés hier comme demandeurs d'asile ou il y a 3 générations, que ces personnes se sentent chez eux, à la maison, dans cet arrondissement. Et dans ce contexte, la crise la plus visible, la plus déchirante, est certainement celle de l'itinérance et des vulnérabilités qui sont croissantes. Le manque criant de logements abordables, les failles dans le soutien en santé mentale et en toxicomanie, ça, c'est des conséquences d'années de sous-financement et peut-être une vision politique qui néglige les plus fragilisés. Mais tout ça jette les gens à la rue jour après jour dans nos quartiers. C'est l'échec d'un système, une injustice que nous voyons chaque jour, nous, sur le terrain. Et face à l'insuffisance des réponses provinciales et fédérales, bien nous, au municipal, on ose agir avec les moyens qu'on a, c'est-à-dire les taxes foncières municipales. Alors, on se bat pour plus de logements hors marché. On a d'ailleurs réussi récemment dans mon arrondissement à acquérir avec plus de 100 millions de dollars 700 logements pour les soustraire à la spéculation immobilière. C'est 700 logements dans un de nos quartiers les plus fragilisés, où les personnes avaient un stress à chaque année, en fait, qu'un propriétaire, que j'ose dire véreux, augmente leur loyer sans considération de leurs moyens. Aujourd'hui, ces personnes, leurs propriétaires, c'est la Ville de Montréal. Et c'est un soulagement important pour 700 ménages dans Côte-des-Neiges. Ce qu'on fait aussi pour faire face à cette crise, c'est qu'on crée des unités modulaires d'urgence pour les personnes à risque de se retrouver à la rue. On finance les organismes communautaires qui défendent les locataires. On déploie des équipes comme l'équipe mobile de médiation et d'intervention sociale à Montréal pour soutenir les personnes vulnérables dans nos rues et aider à la cohabitation sociale loin des forces policières. Et tout ça, c'est parce que c'est notre devoir de prendre soin, même quand les ressources manquent. L'autre crise qui frappe à nos portes, littéralement, ce sont les changements climatiques. Les inondations en répétition dans les sous-sols des gens de Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, en plein cœur de Montréal, il n'y a aucun cours d'eau autour. L'air vicié par les feux de forêt qui viennent du nord, les îlots de chaleur urbains, et tout ça, c'est plus théorique. C'est le quotidien de nos citoyens. Alors, on ose, et j'insiste, on ose adapter notre ville. On investit dans les parcs éponges, dans les rues éponges, dans des infrastructures vertes. On dépense des milliards de dollars pour transformer notre ville. On verdit massivement nos quartiers pour créer des îlots de fraîcheur. On adopte des règlements d'urbanisme plus stricts dans les zones en cuvette, justement. Et on porte un plan climat qui est ambitieux. En fait, on ose regarder la réalité en face et on prépare l'avenir. Mais ces transformations qui sont nécessaires, et on se comprend ici par rapport à ça, notamment pour le climat et la mobilité, ça ne se fait pas sans heurts. Elles bousculent les habitudes des citoyens, elles génèrent des oppositions, et c'est là que le danger nous guette. Parce que les discours populistes, souvent portés par une certaine droite, exploitent ces frustrations apportées par les changements. Ils montent les citoyens les uns contre les autres, accusent les politiques progressistes d'être antidémocratiques. Simultanément, d'autres discours identitaires cherchent à diviser en désignant les immigrants comme responsables de tous les maux. Dans mon arrondissement, où cohabitent tant de cultures différentes, c'est un poison qui est insidieux, contre lequel on s'attelle à lutter sans relâche. Alors, oser ici, c'est d'abord persévérer. Et ce n'est pas un petit mot. Chaque jour, on persévère sur nos objectifs de transition écologique et sociale, tout en communiquant, évidemment, puis en expliquant et en étant transparent envers les citoyens. Et ça, c'est refuser la polarisation. Et surtout, c'est promouvoir activement l'inclusion. Parce qu'on s'assure aussi la diversité de nos équipes d'arrondissement et à la ville. On investit dans la culture comme un vecteur de rencontre dans les quartiers. On a d'ailleurs bonifié le financement de plusieurs organismes culturels et artistes diversifiés à travers la ville. Ça demande aussi d'être présent sur le terrain dans toutes les communautés, non pas pour les utiliser à chaque élection, mais pour être présent et comprendre comment eux vivent la ville et être en mesure d'apporter les transformations qui nous permettent d'améliorer leur quotidien. Alors tout ça, c'est oser affirmer une société qui est ouverte et qui est solidaire. La troisième crise est celle de l'économie. Parce que les crises sociales, climatiques, identitaires, elles se déploient aujourd'hui dans un contexte économique qui est particulièrement difficile, on le sait tous. Oui, l'inflation, le coût exorbitant du logement, l'incertitude économique amenée par Trump pèse lourdement sur les Montréalaises et les Montréalais. Et vous savez, on entend parfois des voix qui s'élèvent pour dire c'est pas le moment, en fait, pour les politiques progressistes en ce moment. Il faut couper. On ne peut pas se permettre d'investir dans le social ou l'écologie maintenant. Et moi, je crois que c'est exactement le contraire qu'il faut faire. C'est précisément parce que les temps sont durs qu'une vision progressiste est absolument essentielle. Les politiques économiques de droite, nous le savons, frappent toujours les mêmes personnes, c'est-à-dire les plus vulnérables, les services publics dont ils dépendent notamment. Elles creusent les inégalités et fragilisent notre économie à long terme. Alors, oser aujourd'hui, c'est refuser ces politiques et ces réflexes de droite. C'est démontrer que nos actions pour le logement abordable, comme sortir 700 logements du marché spéculatif, ce sont des mesures anti-crise qui soulagent directement le portefeuille et le quotidien des familles. C'est prouver qu'investir dans le transport collectif et dans les pistes cyclables réduit les dépenses des ménages. C'est soutenir notre économie locale, nos commerces de proximité, nos entreprises d'économie sociale pour que la richesse reste et circule ici. Notre approche progressiste, ce n'est pas une dépense, c'est un investissement dans la résilience collective. C'est la meilleure stratégie pour aider nos concitoyens à traverser la tempête, tout en bâtissant une ville qui est plus juste et plus durable pour l'avenir. Ça demande une gestion qui est rigoureuse, certes, mais aussi une défense acharnée de nos services et une solidarité sans faille. Alors, ces dépêches de notre ligne de front montréalaise, elles le montrent. Oui, la polycrise, elle est complexe, mais l'action locale, menée dans des valeurs progressistes, elle offre des solutions qui sont concrètes et porteuses d'espoir. Les villes sont des laboratoires extraordinaires et les villes sont les derniers remparts du progressisme. Mais notre action locale, aussi déterminée soit-elle, elle ne suffit pas. Elle doit s'inscrire dans un mouvement plus large, porté par vous toutes et tous qui êtes ici, par un changement qui est systémique. Alors, on a besoin de politiques provinciales et fédérales à la hauteur des enjeux, qui reconnaissent que soutenir les villes, c'est soutenir directement les citoyens face à la crise économique et climatique. On a besoin de cette solidarité. Face à l'ampleur de la tâche, et ici, dans cette maison qui porte son nom, rappelons les mots d'Ed Broadbent lui-même. Il nous a rappelé que l'optimisme est un acte politique. Ceux qui profitent du statu quo sont parfaitement heureux de nous laisser croire que rien ne peut s'améliorer. Alors cet optimisme politique, ce refus du cynisme, c'est exactement ce dont on a besoin aujourd'hui. C'est le carburant de notre audace. Mon parcours de l'hôpital à l'hôtel de ville m'a appris que prendre soin des gens et oser changer les systèmes qui les rendent malades ou vulnérables, y compris économiquement, ce sont les deux faces d'une même médaille, en fait. C'est le cœur de l'engagement progressiste. Alors oui, osons. Osons incarner un optimisme politique. Osons affronter ces crises avec courage, avec intelligence et surtout tous ensemble, pour bâtir ici, à Montréal et partout au Canada, des communautés plus justes, plus vertes, économiquement résilientes et profondément humaines. Merci.
Wow, ça commence bien la journée, hein? It starts well today, so thank you very much, Gracia. You show what it is to have leadership and to have braveness and to act. I can see her on the ground and it moves in Côte des Neiges and DG. Think about her next time you go there. Now we are transporting ourselves to Toronto, receiving Erin McKay. She's the current research and campus strategy co-lead at Regeneration and a recent grad from University of Toronto. She co-founded Climate Justice of University of Toronto, and she led the charge that pushed the School of Environment to cut ties with the fossil fuel industry, making it the first climate institution in North America to do so. Erin's work is all about building power and mobilizing communities to fight for a more just and sustainable future. Welcome to Erin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Mackey. I'm glad to be with all of you this morning and hear from so many amazing organizers and folks fighting for so many different issues. I want to spend my time with you this morning telling you a little bit about my story and why I got involved in climate justice organizing, and tell you more broadly the story of climate justice organizers, youth climate justice organizers across so-called Canada and North America. I was originally born in Boston, Massachusetts, on the traditional land of the Musqueam, the Nipmuc, and the Pawtucket people. And I am, unfortunately, a dual US and Canadian citizen. And I moved to Toronto for university to attend the University of Toronto. And I was at the climate strike in Toronto, as many other youth were at the time, and I was invigorated by that moment. I was immensely inspired by the thousands and thousands of people that were in the streets fighting for a better world, fighting for a better planet, a livable future. And there was so much momentum and energy, and I felt that in my heart. And I wanted to bring that to campus, and then COVID hit, and we moved all of our classes online. And, you know, so many people were impacted by COVID in so many different ways, but one of them was organizing on campus kind of ground to a complete halt, right? It was very, very difficult to find community on Zoom, let alone organize and build power together. And I remember I attended a meeting of this group called LEAP U of T, which was the main group organizing for fossil fuel divestment at the time. And there was 7 folks who were there, 5 of whom were graduating, and they were really burnt out and they were exhausted against fighting an administration, the University of Toronto, that had continued to refuse to divest from fossil fuels. And me and my friend Leo were sitting around and we were so inspired by all the work that these folks had done, we said, we cannot let this group die. And so we decided to rebrand and relaunch the group under a new name, Climate Justice U of T, and continue to fight for fossil fuel divestment. And in 2021, the University of Toronto did what at some previously believed to be impossible. They committed to divesting from fossil fuels. Now I cannot stand before you and take credit for that win. That win is the work of hundreds of student organizers for 10 plus years at the university, hundreds of student organizers across so-called Canada and North America who had been pushing for those demands. But again, what felt impossible was no longer impossible. The University of Toronto committed to divestment from fossil fuels, as well as many other universities around the world. And it was in that moment, celebrating that win, which is a really, really big win, we started to think about, well, what else is the university investing in, right? You know, they are no longer investing their funds in fossil fuels, which they deem to be, harming the planet and their students' futures, but what other things are they invested in? And I realized quite quickly that the university, like many universities across so-called Canada and the United States, are invested in weapons manufacturing and companies that are complicit in genocides around the world. And so in my last year of university, I got involved in organizing around Palestine and organizing to push the University of Toronto to, to divest from fossil fuels, but also divest from weapons manufacturing companies complicit in genocide. And so it's through that story and that process, organizing around fossil fuel divestment, organizing around weapons divestment, that was the experience and story of many, many youth climate organizers across Canada and North America. Because as climate justice organizers, we realize intricately that the climate crisis is a crisis of multiple things. It's a crisis of settler colonialism, of genocide, of displacement of Indigenous peoples around the world, extraction, exploitation, and that all of those things are deeply intertwined and interconnected, and that there can be no climate justice without a free Palestine, that there can be no climate justice without a free Congo or Sudan, that there can be no climate justice without, affordable housing and, access to quality food, education, labor rights, and that all of these things are deeply, deeply interconnected. And so it's through that story and that process that I speak with all of you who are organizing across many, many different issues. And we arrive in a moment where many of those issues are under attack from the far right. We are witnessing the rise of, or albeit already here, authoritarianism and fascism in the United States. We're witnessing that here in Canada. There are trans people that are under attack. There are Palestinian organizers who are under attack and facing arrest, deportation. We are in a crisis on multiple fronts in multiple ways. And so, as progressive organizers, it is up to us to band together to build networks of mutual defense, mutual solidarity, and rise to this moment and rise to this challenge. Because ultimately, in my view, that is the only way that we have a chance of winning. That is the only way we have a chance of building power, of building a better and just livable world for everyone. Because that's what we want, right? We all want those things, and it's important for us to do that work. But it requires trust. We know historically that the climate justice movement has done a pretty poor job of building that trust and working across movements and breaking those silos and showing up, for land defense or for pipelines and all these things. And there are pockets and, moments where people have done so, but as a collective, we need to do a much better job. And so I'm continually inspired by many folks in this room who are doing that work, building those trusts, building those mutual defense networks. And I tend to be a cautiously optimistic person, which in this moment feels quite hard, but I still am, because I look out across at all of you, and I believe that a different world is possible. I know it's possible, because I have seen it, and I'm sure that I will see it within my lifetime. So thank you all, and I will leave you with that.
Thank you, Erin, for that powerful reminder of what's possible when students organize and refuse to stay silent in the face of corporate power. From campus to community, that same spirit of resistance is showing up across the country. And our next dispatch is from another organizer in my home city of Toronto. Charlene Henry is a tenant organizer with the York South-Weston Tenants Union, and she knows firsthand how the housing crisis is impacting working people, and she's been organizing building by building to demand rent control, safe living conditions, and dignity for tenants. This is what it means to take on today's crises, not with fear, but with determination and community power. Welcome, Charlene.
Good morning. How's everyone feeling today? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I ended up on a 16-month rent strike and won. My name's Charlene Henry. I'm a mom, a daughter, a wife, an auto worker, a member of Unifor Local 1285, and most importantly, I'm part of the York South-Weston Tenant Union. I am currently co-chair. So I've been living in the building I live in for about 20 years now, and we were under attack. Our landlord decided that they're going to do some repairs and do these things that everyone heard called AGIs. What is an AGI? It's an above guideline increase. It's an increase in Ontario that landlords could do if they do capital repairs on a building. It's above the guideline that the government allows. And for our building, in the matter of 10 years, my son was 10 years old, we had 8 go through. It affected everyone in our building in a different way. We have people living there that are new to Canada, people who have lived there for many years, 30 plus years, 40 years, including myself who's lived there for a couple decades, and people who live there for 3 or 4 or 5 years. These rent increases would increase people's rent about $150 or $100 a month each year, and would be multiple increases every single year and bleed into one another. Besides the fact that the landlord-tenant board is backed up, and to fight this, it takes forever, and landlords win and tenants don't, we decided that we need to take back our power. We need to fight the system that keeps us in a constant state of unsecure housing. As we all probably agree with in this room, like myself, housing is a human right. Everyone deserves a place that's clean, free from repairs, and is affordable to live in. So many of my neighbors decided that we were going to fight back against our landlord. And in this process, we did many things. We did phone zaps. We called CEOs. We called our MPs. We reached out to our city councillor. We reached out to our Minister of Housing, who at the time was our York South-Weston parliamentary member. No one got back to us. No one listened. We did petitions. We organized building after building, including my own, to fight against these increases that were keeping people out of housing that was secure. And over the years, we got frustrated and more frustrated. We had some wins. We won back percentages off on these AGIs, but it wasn't enough. Specifically in my building, our landlord didn't want to give us back money that we were deserved, that we won back. So in June 1st, 2023, we officially went on a rent strike. In a 400-unit building, 200 brave people decided I'm going to hold back my rent. When I say a rent strike, people do, what's a rent strike? Well, we knew we were okay. We knew that we wouldn't be taken to court for months because, as I said, the system is backed up, 8 months. So we knew we had a few months to try to negotiate with the landlord. And that was the goal, to negotiate for no more above guideline increases, to negotiate all the repairs that were needed in the building, and to make sure that people had security in their housing. Our landlord didn't want to negotiate with us. So the rent strike went on. It went on for months and months. We door knocked every week to make sure people were okay and still withholding their rent and saving it. We were threatened. The police were called on us. They hired security to keep people who lived in a building to door knock, stop door knocking. That's how bad it got. It was tense. Every day, me and my neighbors still turned our key and went to our homes after a day of work or whatever it is we do in our lives. For me, it became really stressful. I had many intimate conversations with my neighbors about how important it was to win this, how much it meant to have affordable housing, how much it meant to live in the neighborhood that we live in, that we love. York South-Weston is an old community in Toronto, full of many different cultures, many different people from different places in the world, but the beauty of the neighborhood is that we are diverse, that we are strong. And as someone who has a family, my family loves our neighborhood. During this time, I learned a lot. My union supported me 150%. Unions in general supported us 150%. People came out to our rallies, people phone zapped, people called the members of parliament. People just came out and supported us 100%. This little pocket in a big city with 3 million people, people supported us. So along this journey, I learned that there's always solidarity when you fight back. I've also learned that without housing, people are not okay. So we have to keep fighting and make sure that we vote properly in this election so that housing is always at the top of the list with all the many issues we have here in Canada. Thank you, and solidarity.
What an incredible story. Thank you, Charlene. Your work reminds us that courage, tenacity, and clarity are powerful tools. For our last dispatch, I'm thrilled to introduce Avery Jagdave. You already got some fans out here. A student organizer at the University of Toronto and a graduate of the Broadbent Institute's Emerging Leaders Program. She's part of the generation pushing for systemic change on campuses, in the streets, and across the country. Whether it's affordability, reproductive rights, or student rights, Avrit is organizing for real solutions, not status quo politics. Welcome, Avrit.
Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy E18 to everyone who celebrates. My name is Avery Jagdave. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently the Vice President of Public and University Affairs at the University of Toronto Students' Union. We're the second largest student union in Canada, where we represent over 40,000 undergraduate students. I also do want to give a quick shout out to the Emerging Leaders Program. It's an incredible program. Congrats to this year's Emerging Leaders. My role at the UTSU involves directing the advocacy of our union. My term is coming to an end, and what a year it has been. Over the past year, we've seen life get harder for all of us, not just for students. The affordability crisis has spiked. Food insecurity is on the rise, and housing is hard to obtain. Trump was elected south of the border, and a genocide is being conducted in Palestine. The far right is rising. They are organized, they are well-funded, and they are tapping into our widespread fear and as well as misinformation. We are seeing all of these issues and events manifest and spill over onto our campuses, from the criminalization and pushback against student activism, such as the encampments over the summer, to a rise in academic censorship and a spike in student reliance on programs like free food programming and transit fare banks. It's clear that students are feeling it. And it's also clear that we are in a deeply scary time. We're also in an important time. We're on the brink of a federal election where we have the opportunity to elect principled and compassionate and kind leaders, which I hope we will do. But important change happens between and outside of electoral politics. And even if things go our way during this election cycle, which I hope that they will, this election won't save us, especially those of us who exist at the margins. Acknowledging that can feel overwhelming. I know I'm overwhelmed right now. And in times like this, when the world feels too big and too scary and everything just kind of sucks, I remind myself of how I got started in activism in the first place. I was in my first year of university, on my way to one of my very first classes, when I saw a group of anti-abortion protesters. I'm sure many of us have seen them before. They were holding very large, graphically violent signs that are extremely unavoidable. It's uncomfortable for anyone, especially for those of us who have a uterus. So I started rushing away, but I noticed a girl who had been walking alongside me, who had stopped completely in her tracks. I didn't know who she was, but it was clear to me in that moment that she needed somebody. So I went up to her, I introduced myself, I offered to walk her to class, and during our short walk, I learned about her experience with an abortion and how deeply harmful this imagery was. From there, we mobilized a group of students, now a recognized group on campus called Students for Choice. And over the past 3 years, when anti-abortion protesters show up on our campus, you can bet that we'll show up too. We block their signs with signs of our own. And sometimes they catch us off guard. They show up when no one's really expecting it. You're studying for a midterm in the library and you get a text. So you still show up. I have taken off my own hoodie to try to cover their signs, used random cardboard I found on the sidewalk and washed my hands after, and covered it with my own body, standing directly in front of it so that people walking on campus don't have to be exposed to such violent imagery on their way to class. In this terrifying time, where the far right is rising and it feels like our rights are on the line, I believe that it is these acts of kindness and resistance and community that are going to sustain us. And I also want to emphasize that we cannot take any of what we have for granted. Almost 3 years ago, Roe was overturned in the United States. It caught many of us by surprise, and in Canada, we tend to think that abortion is a settled issue, but it is not. In our country, there exist more crisis pregnancy centers, which are fake healthcare clinics established by anti-abortion groups that shame and scare people away from abortion, than actual clinics where you can access an abortion. And it's not just the far right that are making this happen and allowing this to take place. It's also the centrists, like Mr. Mark Carney, who included no minister for women and gender equality in his cabinet. In a country where if I walk into a random clinic that claims to offer services for pregnant people, and the chance is higher that I will be shamed into opting out of an abortion than actually provided with unbiased healthcare, trust me, we need a minister for women and gender equality. We are in a crucial moment, and we cannot afford to miss it. To me, meeting this moment that we're in means daring to take on today's crises in whatever ways you can. And a lot of times, to me, it means caring. It means looking out for one another, for your neighbors, your colleagues, your peers, your friends, strangers on the street. We all know that things are not going to be getting better overnight, but we must show up in community for one another. Resistance should, and it often does, begin and end with care and community. It is what will sustain us, and it is what will keep us going during these dark times. And eventually, it will become what will propel us into a future that is brighter and safer and kinder for us all. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Avret. Merci à toutes nos invités. Votre travail incarne l'esprit de ce sommet, solidarité, action et courage. Nous allons maintenant prendre une pause café. Le café est disponible dans le hall central et cette pause est rendue possible grâce à nos commanditaires Wellington Advocacy, Council of Public Affairs, American Income Life et Cavaluzzo.
Thank you again to our incredible speakers. Your stories ground us and guide us as we navigate this moment and build for what's coming next. To not take anything for granted, like Everett said, and to fight for the freedoms we have and to expand them and push to expand them, especially as what we see is coming down the pike. So, like Maeva said, stretch your legs, refill that coffee, and we'll see you back here at 10:30 sharp. For our first panel, Trade, Politics, and Power. What's next for Canada and the US? Question mark? Hopefully we can answer that. Thank you.
Hello, folks. The summit is about to resume. Please kindly make your way to your next session. Le sommet va bientôt recommencer. Veuillez prendre vos places. The summit is about to resume. Please kindly make your way to your next session. Le sommet va bientôt recommencer. Veuillez prendre vos places. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. One more again. Welcome back, everyone. There we go. We hope you had a chance to grab some coffee and connect with folks. We would gently request that if you are still connecting with folks, that you connect seated and facing the dais and a little bit more quietly. We are now turning to a conversation that is especially timely: trade, politics, and power. What's next for Canada and the US? As we face overlapping crises, from economic uncertainty to the rise of a more fascistic and more authoritarian politics, trade policy is once again at the center of it all. And with a federal election on the horizon, the stakes could not be higher. Today's panel brings together two people who've shaped trade policy from inside government and who understand the political, economic, and social forces at play across the border with our southern, currently very orange neighbor. Beth Baltzan served as Counselor for Trade and Investment to Catherine Tai, President Biden's U.S. trade representative, where she worked to advance progressive, worker-centered trade strategies. Steve Verhoeven is the former ADM, Assistant Deputy Minister for Trade, Policy and Negotiations at Global Affairs Canada. He was Canada's chief negotiator for major agreements, including CETA and the USMCA, aka the renegotiated NAFTA. Moderating today's panel is Brian Topp, the chair of our board here at the Broadbent Institute, and also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-US Relations. Please join me in welcoming Beth Baltzan, Steve Verhoeven, and Brian Topp.
Well, bonjour tout le monde. Un grand plaisir de vous voir. I think you'll agree with me that we have been seeing some interesting headlines on the topic that we're going to talk about today. So first, we saw a headline that the President of the United States, as one of his first acts, made a commitment that he was going to use economic power to break the economy of Canada and to compel us to surrender our sovereignty and our independence. And then on the basis of transparent lies, began a program of economy-busting tariffs on Canada, the United States' closest trading partner. And then he followed this up recently by declaring a global war on penguins. And then we discovered something that we didn't know, which is that declaring a war on penguins is more scary than declaring a war on Canada. And so after only a few days of watching the stock market melt and the bond market melt down because of this act, he blinked. And we got to watch the video of the U.S. trade representative in front of Congress. I don't know if you dote on these things, but I've had to lately. And the U.S. trade representative being interrogated by Congress people clearly did not know that this was happening. And so we got the spectacle of one of the most senior U.S. officials in the U.S. government directly on this issue, who clearly did not know that policy on this matter is being set on a golf course and being announced on Twitter. So one of our guests here today must have watched that, feeling a little wry, because she used to work with the U.S. trade representative, and so, but for the grace of God, that could have been you, sister. And our other guest, who also knows something about appearing in front of parliamentary committees, must have also watched it, thinking the same. In any event, Beth and Steve are some of the most senior people on the globe working on these issues, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're privileged to have you. Please welcome our guests again. So we're going to get right into it here. So my first question is to Beth. So Beth, I want to start on a note of optimism now that the Penguins are on our side. What's a progressive trade policy in 2025 in this era of increasing government by the authoritarian right? And are working people in the US persuadable that that would be a better option?
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. I love this question. I love the title of this panel because it has the word power in it. Your question has concerns about authoritarianism in it, and it's about what a progressive trade policy is. So I'm inspired by the young people who were speaking this morning and the people I see out in the audience. The touchstone for us on progressive policy, progressive economic policy in the US is, of course, Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt came to power in the 1930s, around the same time as Hitler. He was deeply affected by the loss of democracy in Europe, and that informed his approach to the New Deal. It was about making sure that we don't have economic precarity for working people, because economic precarity is what leads to authoritarianism. So the New Deal at its core was about the balance of power between working people and the robber barons, the tycoons, the people with excess corporate power coming out of the Gilded Age. So we wanted to strengthen labor unions. We had the Wagner Act, really supporting the right to organize and bargain collectively, freedom of association, and also a very robust anti-monopoly policy so that you're putting some constraints on those corporations. Here's the trade part that was forgotten. When it came time to think about what kind of global trading system we were going to have after the war, FDR's original vision was not tariff cuts as the pathway to peace and prosperity. It was to internationalize the New Deal. He worked with Canada, he worked with the United Kingdom, he worked with other countries, and then negotiated a charter, the International Trade Organization Charter, that had in it fair labor standards and anti-monopoly rules. So that power balance from the New Deal was meant to be infused in the rules that it would have governed the multilateral trading system. Those rules didn't come to pass because big business in the United States didn't like it. It was too Keynesian. It was all about full employment and industrial policy. And so it never entered into force. As we think, and this was something we spent a lot of time on in the Biden administration last year, recognizing this resurgence of authoritarianism, recognizing inequality, and looking at the International Trade Organization Charter as reflecting a truly progressive trade policy. I think the question for us is, what can we take from that in 2025, but also for the young people here, for the next generation? What do we do in 2025, and what do we do beyond? And I think if you root it in that understanding of the power of working people, you do get organized labor on board.
Okay, I hope you all caught that. We're talking about global trade, and that was a note of hope. So Steve, is there such a thing as a progressive trade policy? And is it imaginable in today's world, the growing authoritarian right?
Well, I think there certainly is such a thing as progressive trade policy. I think that's where a large part of the world was headed before we had the Trump administration come into office. I think now we've seen that that is not going to get us very far with this administration. Much of that is going to be rolled back, I expect, in these agreements he's talking about. So I view this as a setback to progressive trade policy. I think it'll probably come back, but it's going to be a rough ride for a few years.
Let's just do a little follow-up on this. Trump, when he was doing his penguin tariffs, made a point of having workers from the UAW up there to support them. And so it seemed like labor solidarity was fracturing across the border, and at least those voices were saying it works for working people to go down this road of these of breaking international trade. So is there a path where working people sign up again for progressive trade policy as opposed to what's on offer from the current president?
This is where the United States has been in an unusual position because of the size of its market and because of the amount of consumption that exists in the United States, which is very attractive to every other country's exports. If you have a system that is principally based on tariff cuts and hasn't seen that power dynamic, we just have to reckon with the fact that trade agreements in the United States have been used to break labor power. And organized labor knows it. That is something we have to correct for. Some workers in the United States hear the word tariff and it says to them, oh, you get that the old way wasn't working for me and you want to do something else. And that is the appeal. If we do a better job, for me, a lot of trade policy in the United States is also domestic policy. We should be trying to repeal Taft-Hartley. That should be part of the trade conversation. If you do that, if you map out a pathway where you're seeing workers and really recognizing the ways in which we went about trade policy undermine their bargaining position, then you can get them to understand that what you're trying to do is advance a trade policy that has their interests at the core. That was at the heart of the worker-centered trade policy that we in the Biden administration were pursuing.
Do you want to comment on that, Steve? No. Very wise. Okay, so I'm going to, if you're noticing that I'm reading these questions, I have to tell you, if you want to see what tough bargaining is like, you should see what it's like to talk about panel questions to these two. So I'm keeping my end of the bargain by sticking to what we agreed on. But that doesn't mean they're not going to be ornery, so here's one for you. So our Prime Minister Carney said a few days ago, and I quote, "It's clear that the United States is no longer a reliable partner." And he said, "We will need to dramatically reduce our reliance on the United States. We will need to pivot our trade relationships elsewhere." Is he right? And if he is right, how do we do that?
Well, as usual, things are a little more complicated than that. I think we should be doing whatever we can to reduce our reliance on the U.S. market. They clearly have shown us that they're an unreliable partner. We should be getting more out of our domestic market by reducing internal barriers. That would certainly be helpful. We should be getting more, we should be positioning ourselves to be able to get more out of many of our resources by finding ways to get them to markets more than we have been. And we should be getting more value out of the other 14 free trade agreements we have with another 50 countries and trying to make sure that we can have a stronger trading relationships with all of those. But none of those measures are short-term fixes in any of that. Other markets in particular can be very difficult to get into. We've spent a lot of time doing regulatory alignment with the US. Regulations in Europe and in Asia are different. We'd have to ask our companies to be able to produce to different regulatory standards, different food and safety standards on the agriculture sector, and all of that is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And then we could be left with asking companies to produce to standards for the US to the extent that we still have market access, and have a second set of standards to produce to other markets, or a third, potentially two, depending on where they're going. So it's not an easy thing to do. I think that just as Trump is trying to achieve what he's trying to achieve in a very short period of time, and that's not going to happen, it would be very difficult for us to diversify to that extent in a very short period of time too. So the other challenge that companies have is, do I invest the time and resources into positioning my business to be able to sell to these other markets, knowing there's a very strong possibility that these issues with the US could be temporary, and in 2 years or in 3 years, we could be back to having reasonable terms of access again. So I think at the end of the day, we have to accept that we do have to have some kind of trading relationship with the US. may be different than the one we have now, but we do have to expect that we've got to sort that out somehow. They need us, we need them, but we've got to figure out a new way of trying to have a trade relationship. So I think that's where we'll need to head. 2/3 of our GDP is tied to trade. 75% of our exports go to the US. We can't turn around that quickly. And frankly, the US will always be an easier market to get into once we get past, and I think we will, this particularly contentious period.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on this, Beth?
It strikes me that one of the lessons of the pandemic was to expose that for the last 30 or 40 years, the mantra was that interdependence is good and fragmentation is bad. And where that led us was to a kind of interdependence that created risk and vulnerability in the system. And when I hear Canada talk about how it needs to position itself, or the Europeans about how they need to position themselves, it reminds me of the conversation we were having in the Biden administration about how you manage for dependencies and risks. I would just flag, we put out a paper in January on our way out on adapting to supply chain resilience. I think that paper is still on the USTR website. It might be helpful for people who want to look at that as you think about what your pathway to diversification looks like.
So let me put my next question to you. Is there any prospect, either acting alone or in concert with other democracies, that Canada and Canada's allies could dissuade the U.S. from its present course? Is there any hope here that we can bring this in for a soft landing, or are we in for the tough time that Steve was just alluding to?
There's a couple of reactions. If other governments affirmatively attempt to dissuade, it's going to potentially reinforce the perception that there is this extractive relationship that the president is, in his mind, correcting for. So I would discourage that. I do think that tearing down internal barriers in Canada, and for the European Union, if they figure out how to do the single market, and that's 450 million people with consumption power similar to what the US has had, that's very powerful. And of course, Canada and the EU already have a trade agreement. So my advice to countries is figure out what's in your best interest and figure out how to do that, and let the Americans and perhaps American bond traders figure out how to solve for our internal challenges.
Yeah, no, I think there are things Canada can do, and Canada with the rest of the world, to pressure the U.S. to go in a different direction. I think what we've seen just yesterday with the U.S. backing off the so-called reciprocal tariffs fairly quickly, with the exception of China, it demonstrated that the U.S. administration can feel that kind of pressure. I think given that Canada has retaliated against steel and aluminum tariffs and on autos tariffs and the initial tariffs related to fentanyl, I think retaliation can be a useful tool, and it's unfortunate that most of the rest of the world didn't see it that way, because I think if there had been a more coordinated response from countries around the world, then we could have seen this fall away even more quickly. And I think in this intervening period where we've got 90 days and countries are going to see if they can negotiate something with the U.S., if at the end of that 90 days we haven't made much progress and the U.S. reimposes the tariffs, if countries decided at that point that they should retaliate in some coordinated fashion, I don't think they would last long. And I think that would be a significant rebuke to the U.S. about the merits of going in that kind of direction and completely obliterating trade laws that we've all operated under for the last 75 years.
Let's just pursue this a little bit, because this was kind of the heart of the matter of this council we're both on when we were kicking around what to do about this. And you know, there was a an argument that these kind of tariffs are an act of self-harm and that the consequence for them is going to be to put the United States into a recession. And so you just let them do their work. And that seems to be what a number of the U.S. trade partners seem to be, I think Mexico, for example, basically playing that game. We took a different view, which was, and I think you and I both argued for this, that you cannot just lay in the road while your main trade partner runs you over, and that you have to show them that you're going to fight. Although, as you know, I always argued we couldn't do this alone.
Yes.
And so, is there sense in what, for example, Mexico was doing, that tariffs are an act of self-harm and you just let them work? Or are you hopeful that people will see it our way after they try all the alternatives?
Well, I think, first of all, Canada is now in a difficult position because many countries are not retaliating. Only China and Canada at this point, since the EU backed off their retaliation on steel and aluminum, postponed it this morning. So we're kind of isolated, and that's never a particularly good place to go. But I think with retaliation, there are two main reasons for retaliating. The first is to make sure that your trading partner feels some pain and is going to have some resistance internally to continuing down that policy direction. But the second part of the reason for doing retaliation, I think, is even more important. And we saw this in steel and aluminum when we did it the last time during the last Trump administration. If you don't try to balance the negotiating table to some extent by putting measures on your own side that you're taking to counteract what the U.S. is doing in this case, that you're not then in any kind of balanced position. And what you're doing is you're continuing to offer concessions and never knowing what the price is going to be at the end of the day. And that, I think, is not a great position to be in, because the U.S. can just keep changing the price and keep raising the price. And very hard to get to a settlement that way. If both sides come to the table, you both have the initial measure and retaliation on that table, then you can start to have more of a balanced discussion. It gives you some leverage that you don't otherwise have.
So Beth, I don't want to put you in an awkward position here and commenting on Canada's bargaining tactics, but maybe I'll put this question to you this way. As a friend across the border, what do you think is more persuasive? Countermeasures, as Steve just outlined, to create a balance at the table, hoping that eventually you'll get to a rational bargaining place if we ever can with this administration? Or is penguin power and the meltdown of the bond market a more compelling piece of leverage on the U.S. administration?
I think it's hard to say what leverage points work, and people are trying different things with what I would describe as, shall we say, a mercurial policy. I do think it's really important to be respectful of every country's particular position, their particular leverage points, and every country's sovereignty. So Canada has a certain relationship with the United States, and a much broader one than just the trade relationship. And we should emphasize that the withdrawal of the security guarantee is so aggressive on top of everything else and really affects the whole conversation. Mexico is in a slightly different position. So I think it's appropriate for each of these countries to figure out what's right for them and what's right for their electorate, but also to recognize that the United States is not monolithic, and there are various elements in the United States who are reacting to the totality of the policies by expressing concern about the state of the American economy, and that seems to be having some effect.
Okay, so my next question is to Steve. So, a lot of people in Canada and around the world have been watching all of this going, what is going on here? What are they trying to achieve? What is this for? And I think there was quite an important meeting that followed Ontario's move on electricity that was conducted with Minister LeBlanc and Premier Ford and officials from the U.S. administration. where it seemed that the Trump people were putting their cards on the table a little bit more than we were hearing elsewhere. And as I understand it, you can maybe confirm whether I understood this, they basically said, look, at the end of the day, what we're up to here is we want a full repatriation to the United States of steel production, aluminum production, automobile manufacture, pharmaceuticals, and forestry. And when they talk about full repatriation, what they're talking about, for example, is what Mr. Trump was saying, that every car sold in the United States will be fully manufactured in the United States, and similarly for those other productions. So you could say that at least we understand what they're trying to do. We're mindful that this is the gut, the heart of the Canadian economy to some extent. So is that, is what I just said true, do you believe? Do you think it's a reasonable goal for the United States to pursue that? Should we mirror them? Should we follow a similarly autarkic policy and say, well, we'll have a new national policy and we'll create our own autarkic industries too? And what do you think about this piece of the puzzle?
Well, I think that is one of the primary objectives, particularly for President Trump, to bring a lot of these industries back to the U.S., and have them fully produced within the U.S., and he sees those as not only economic issues, but strategic issues in many ways. But if you take those sectors like autos, steel, aluminum, lumber, pharmaceuticals, likely copper to come, others to come in the future as well. All of these sectors are very closely integrated in the North American economy and to some extent with the rest of the world as well. So the notion of trying to take apart that integrated economy, reshore all of the elements of it within the United States or any particular country is very expensive. It will take a very long time to do it. It's not a 2 or 3 year project. In many cases, it would be more like a 10-year project, which may be well beyond Trump's mandate, hopefully. And I think that it's not only very expensive, it takes a long time, but at the end of it all, you end up with a far less competitive industry than you had to start with. So unless you have no intention of ever competing with imports or ever exporting that product, you're going to pay a lot more for it, and you're going to have a lot of other of the same product being produced much more cheaply. And I think if you take aluminum, it's a good example. The U.S. produces about 50% of their aluminum needs, and they import the rest of the other 50%. Canada is by far the largest supplier of that aluminum. But if the U.S. tried to move towards 100% aluminum production to fill their economy, it would cost them the equivalent of constructing 4 more Hoover dams and much more than $100 billion to do that. And again, they'd still be left with a far less competitive sector in relation to aluminum producers around the world. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think it makes sense for Canada to go down that track either, because I think that same thing on autos, there's a lot of parts that we don't produce in Canada. If we tried to replicate all of those parts, all of that parts production within Canada, again, very long time, very expensive, and we end up with an uncompetitive industry. And given that Canada is a fairly small market, we may have a choice of 1 or 2 cars that we would be able to buy that were Canadian manufacturers. But just on this, it's interesting to look at autos because Canada has about 8% of the population of North America, and we produce about 8% of the cars in the North American market. So there's already a very close match between what each country, the size of each country's population, and the number of cars that are produced. So I think we need to find some way to come back to this notion that we build cars together and we're all better off for it.
Especially for Canada and Mexico, I don't know how firm the commitment to true autarky in these sectors really is. We'll find out. But We can also see some of the actions potentially as establishing a negotiating position for, you call it CUSMA, we call it USMCA. I was surprised to see the tariffs on auto parts made in Canada and Mexico, because the whole point was to integrate these industries and treat those parts as equal. It's part of the reason I think people are surprised to see UAW workers in the Rose Garden. There is solidarity across labor movements in North America. That matters. And I get the feeling people are wondering if that's still true. I think it is still true. And so if it's possible that that's a negotiating position for purposes of USMCA, that's one way for Canada and Mexico to look at the totality of the actions. The other piece of it for us, we did take away when we were in office from the pandemic that we had a supply chain concentration problem and that we needed to think about ways to diversify away. And we were critical of the flaws in the global trading system that contributed to those outcomes, and that I think is also part of the solution. What is a progressive trade policy? Seeing what drove those outcomes, which were so bad for people, including our frontline workers. We were never about reshoring absolutely everything to the United States, because that is also not going to be resilient. What you want is diversification in different nodes of production in different places, so that when there is a pandemic or when there is an earthquake or some kind of disaster, including unfortunately war, you've got someplace else to go to be able to source those goods. To me, that is the missed opportunity of not having democracies come together and say, how are we going to devise a system that allows all of us to have opportunities to make things throughout the supply chain and ensure that we have a more resilient global economy for whatever shock comes next?
But I think we should just spend a little bit more time on this one, because I think it might be the heart of the matter. So look, Trump, like the authoritarian right, also the democratic world, and we see this in Canada with our own authoritarian right, is appealing to working people, directly appealing to working people, and saying, you've been betrayed by the progressives who governed you for the last 20 to 30 years. Look at what has happened to you. The welfare went to a handful of people. You can't afford housing, you can't afford food. Your children are not going to have the kind of future you had. It's their fault. And we're going to act directly and with force to bring your jobs back from where they were exported to the benefit of a few. And then we're going to get back to the glorious ways that things were in whenever America was great, which, depending on the day, Mr. Trump seems to feel is either the 60s, the 50s, or maybe the 1890s. Still a little hard to tell. And if it's true that those 5 industries are basically what they're targeting, those industries are about the 7 swing states that elected Trump. They're about speaking to working people in the Rust Belt, if you will, in the United States, and saying, we're going to reopen the steel mills in Pennsylvania. We are going to bring back auto manufacturing to Detroit, and the 1 million people who have left Detroit will come back. So I think there's a political agenda here, a direct political agenda, and an effort to bring hope to working people, to break, kind of the inherent majority that was behind the Democratic Party, and to create a new majority that will give us many Trumps to the future. And so if that's the case, then what are we putting up against that? What's the hope against that for working people? Where do working people see hope that isn't in the agenda of an authoritarian right that is promising to get back to the way things used to be, that people were being persuaded was better than what they got now? What do you think?
So now you know why I keep going back to FDR, because he confronted these exact same challenges, and his solution was economic policies to shrink inequality. Those swing states also voted for Joe Biden. And there is that side of President Biden that is Scranton Joe, whose father lost his job and couldn't put food on the table, who really connected with working people. Joe Biden walked the picket line with UAW. For me, if I could give a plea to my own party in the States, it is for us to remember what that FDR coalition was and to rebuild it and to really recognize that there are some challenges with the way we design the global trading system that hurt working people in the United States. And it's a reality that people do not want to wrestle with. They went to university, they took the economics classes, all free trade is good trade. That's just not the reality that we saw for a lot of working people. So the affirmative part of this is that you can do a progressive trade policy. You can have good relationships among countries, but it has to be grounded in economic security for working people, and not for American workers at the expense of Mexican workers or South African workers. It's gotta be economic security for working people all over the world. And so I'll come back to it. That's why I love the title of this panel, because it's got the word power in there. And my boss was at a conference last year. It was an antitrust conference, and the title of it was Power versus Price. And if we think more about power and that workers are part of our economy, and less about price, that everyone's only a consumer, we will find our way towards a positive trading system.
And don't let them tell you it can't be done, as we like to say here. So Steve, I'll just stay in this one for a minute longer. So let's say I was right, and that's the political logic behind what's going on here. So in consequence, we're not just talking about numbers and about a business play. We are talking about a theory of the case to keep the Republicans in office indefinitely in the United States by breaking the Democratic coalition and getting working people, those UAW workers, to reaffiliate with the Republicans in the long term. Does that not make it much more difficult to imagine that the tools we've been talking about will dissuade them from their course? Since at the end of the day, if they don't have this, what have they got to win their elections in the future?
Yeah, well, I think it's an issue that the Trump administration in particular is looking at very simply, and I think there are many more aspects to it that aren't being considered, because I think when you do talk in particular about a progressive kind of approach, one of the avenues that trade policy can use to address that is really when you get, you look at trade as being fair trade on a level playing field, and you're heading down a path that companies and workers can compete on a more fair basis. So if you look at labor standards, then having low labor standards shouldn't be a competitive advantage into markets that have higher labor standards. If one country has virtually no environmental standards, and as a result can produce much, much more cheaply than, say, in North America, there should be some adjustment made so that that's not an advantage against workers that are having to live with higher environmental standards and the higher costs that come with those. So that's an area of trade policy that really needs to be worked on so that we can look at what a level playing field looks like from that perspective, and not with unfair advantages because you have lower standards. So I think that's something that we need to try to keep holding on to, even though we're in this new regime. And I think the other issue is that we need to stop thinking about trade policy and trade agreements in a silo, because trade is a very brute instrument. It's very crude. And was always intended to be worked with domestic policy, because trade will provide benefits to economies, but it's up to domestic policies to figure out how to distribute those benefits, how to ensure there's some degree of equality in those getting the benefits. And I think that's an issue that too often gets ignored. So we see very quickly rising inequality in the US. We're seeing the current administration wanting to have even higher tax cuts at the highest end. There's going to be more problems coming from that than there are from trade at the end of the day, in my view.
Okay, so we're in the last 2 minutes of this panel, which was going to be followed by another one on the same topic. We're going to hear from our labor leadership, talk about how we navigate this. So I'm going to throw this last question to both of you. I'll start with Steve, and then Bethy will wrap us up. So here's what we'll wrap on. Should we take Trump's threat to our sovereignty and independence seriously, or is this another passing moment, let's say? And how do you think this is going to end?
Well, I think first of all, his comments about our sovereignty, I think almost all Canadians find them completely offensive and insulting, and they have no place in the discourse between leaders and should not have. But I think when President Trump said it, he probably meant what he was saying, or probably believed what he was saying. I think he basically likes the look, how getting rid of that border would look on a map. I'm not sure the analysis has been much more sophisticated than that. But I think that what we're really seeing is that, we're not hearing as much of it lately. I think that's obviously a good thing. I think we should look forward to completely having this as something that's now been done and over, and we're moving on to something that's much more real and much more legitimate.
Okay, and then how do you think it's going to end?
Sorry?
Be a predictor. How do you think this is going to end?
How do I think it's going to end? I have no doubt how it's going to end. We won't be the 51st state. We will maintain our sovereignty. And I think President Trump is going to have enough challenges with the rest of his term, and I think if he was serious about trying to do this, this would be by far the biggest challenge of his term, and another one that he would fail.
Well, Beth, over to you on these light questions. Is there anything else you'd like to say to us as we wrap up?
On the how will this end, sort of generally, what was the Gilded Age? The Gilded Age was robber barons and extreme inequality. It was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. It was the meatpacking conditions that led Upton Sinclair to write The Jungle. We know that that was unsustainable for working people. And what followed the Gilded Age? The New Deal followed the Gilded Age. So that is my pathway for us. Where we end up is to complete the New Deal. It wasn't racially equitable because of segregationists in Congress. The Great Society was a step towards that. But I think that is where we are ultimately going to end up.
Okay, well, we couldn't have had two better informed guests to kick off our discussion about this. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today. That was fascinating. And on to our second panel. Thank you so much. Au revoir.
Thank you for our speakers. What we've seen over the last few months is not business as usual. Les accords commerciaux ne sont pas neutres. Ils reflètent des choix politiques et ils ont des conséquences directes sur les conditions de vie et de travail de tous et toutes. And that brings us perfectly to our next conversation. Across the country, workers are feeling the pressure, not just from rising costs and corporate greed, but from new trade and tariff measures coming from across the border. These U.S. actions are putting real strain on Canadian industries, disrupting supply chains, driving up prices, and creating uncertainty for both private and public sector workers. In the face of that pressure, it's the labor movement that's standing up, that's organizing to defend good jobs, protect public services, and push back against unfair trade measures and economic policies that leave working people behind. Ce sont les travailleurs et travailleuses et les syndicats qui résistent, qui protègent nos emplois, qui demandent mieux. To lead us into this next discussion, we're honored to welcome Bea Brusk, President of the Canadian Labour Congress. Bea is a longtime trade unionist and a fierce advocate for working people. She's going to kick things off with remarks on the challenge ahead of us. Then she'll host an in-depth conversation on how Canadian unions are responding during this time of economic and political uncertainty, with Patrick Campbell, Canadian Regional Director for the International Union of Operating Engineers, Rebecca Caron, President of the Society of United Professionals, Sharon D'Souza, National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, Mark Hennessy, Special Assistant to the National President of the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union Canada. C'est avec une immense fierté que nous invitons à accueillir sur scène Bea Brusk.
Good morning. So Rachel Notley told me that if they offer you a box to stand on, you always say yes to the box. So folks, 1 million Canadian jobs. 1 million Canadian jobs are connected to cross-border trade. And right now, those jobs and those workers are under threat. Let's let that sink in for just a minute. 1 million jobs across Canada. We are watching in real time the surge of tariffs, the surge of trade actions, and economic decisions out of Washington that are reshaping our industries, creating very deep uncertainties for workers and for communities right across this country. And make no mistake, this is not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about families, individual workers, wondering about whether or not they're going to be able to pay the bills next month. It's about workers watching their plants shutting down. Literally, workers watching their jobs disappear and popping up in the United States. It's about skilled tradespeople watching projects get paused or reevaluated. Those are the ripple effects of a trade policy driven not by fairness, but by fear. And we are here today because we cannot allow Canadian workers to be collateral damage of a foreign economic strategy or a lack of a strategy. And let's be clear, this is not just a trade dispute. It's a broader attempt to undermine Canada as a nation state. Donald Trump's latest wave of tariff threats is a part of a calculated campaign, not just to protect US jobs, but to weaken ours, and he is using trade as his weapon. It's economic warfare, and it's here to destabilize our economy. And why is that? It's because he's chasing a dangerous fantasy, a vision where Canada is no longer an independent country, but just part of the United States. But what he doesn't understand is that Canadians do not cave, my friends. We don't flinch, and we will never be part of the United States of America. But we are already seeing the impact of these trade tariff threats. Investment in production and in hiring decisions are under hold and under review. Over 120,000 jobs in the steel and aluminum industry are at risk. Another 125,000 automotive industry jobs, and nearly 500,000 additional jobs that are downstream supply chains that are hanging in the balance as we speak. Add to that agri-food producers facing rising costs, shrinking access to markets, and tighter border restrictions that they're seeing. And as well, for every one of these trade disruptions, it spills into our broader economy every day. Because we all know in this room that when workers lose jobs, communities lose revenue, and we lose access to important public services that all of us rely on. And it's public services that carry the load. Emergency rooms are already pushed to the brink. They will be pushed even further. Social service agencies are facing a surging demand already. Childcare centers, schools, housing supports are already stretched too thin. And frontline public service workers are already under tremendous pressure day in and day out, and they will be expected to pick up the pieces of the fallout. But here's the difference between us and Trump. While he aims to divide and dismantle, we believe in one another in Canada. And in Canada, we look out for each other. We don't abandon people in hard times. We support them through public health care, through strong education systems, through affordable childcare, through public transit, and affordable housing. That is who we are as Canadians. And these services aren't just social policy, they are the foundation of our economic security. That infrastructure for equality, for inclusion, and for recovery is a priority for us in Canada. The contrast between our vision of Canada and the one being imported by the right wing could not be any clearer. Right now, I want you to think about this, right now, at this very moment, right across town, Conservatives and the Canada Strong and Free Conference are listening to the former Hungarian president, who is also the current campaign chair of Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Like, think about that for a minute. An emissary of authoritarian politics brought in to Canada to speak about how to dismantle the very values that define us as Canadians. Community, care, and collective responsibility are those values. While we fight to strengthen what makes Canada fair and inclusive, they are learning how to weaken it. And they want us to be divided. They want us to have fewer rights, fewer protections, and fewer public goods. But my friends, that is not the kind of country that we are building collectively. We are building a Canada where workers are respected, where public services are protected, and where our independence is non-negotiable. So let's be clear. If we want a resilient economy, we have to defend and expand public services, not to cut them. And we also need to look ahead on public services, because we're not just losing today's jobs, we're missing out on tomorrow's by not investing in our strong public services. Global investors are hesitating. We see battery plant projects are being stalled. Food processors are choosing other jurisdictions. All the while, the US is moving full steam ahead with economic attacks and uncertainty, and Canada is waiting for a plan. So here's the real question for us. Are we in Canada ready to act, my friends? Yes. Are we all ready to build a worker-centered industrial strategy that is sorely needed in Canada? Yes. A strategy that's rooted in good union jobs and long-term strategic planning, coordination across the provinces, the territories, and all sectors. We already have the tools, my friends. We have the resources and we have the people. We have the strategic advantage that many other countries around the world envy. Canada has a lot of energy. We have critical minerals. We have the most highly skilled, highly educated, and diverse workforce in the world, my friends. And we have a labor movement that is ready to lead. We will be using those strengths, not just to meet our own needs, but to shape supply chains and trade agreements on our terms. We need to build infrastructure to support that plan. Right now, 75% of Canada's exports flow through the US. That has to change. We need cross-country access to fresh tidewater. We need national investments in Canadian ports and transportation corridors, in logistics systems. We need investments that connect our regions, that strengthen our independence, that create thousands of good union jobs across this country. We need to look inward too, because we are fighting diversity on our global trade, but we still face barriers right here at home. All of us in this room have heard ad nauseum about interprovincial trade barriers, about that's creating missed opportunities. But I want to be clear, the solution is not more deregulation. It's not harmonizing downward at the risk and expense of workers in this country. If we're going to increase trade in Canada, it has to be a worker-centered project. It has to be about raising standards for all workers, not about lowering them. About ensuring that every single worker, no matter where they live, can benefit from the shared prosperity and not have a race to the bottom. So to everyone here today, this is a very defining moment, and the road ahead is going to be tough. But we are Canadian. We will see more disruption. We will see more attempts to divide us. But Canada's labour movement is strong. We are focused and we are ready. We collectively have faced down bullies before. We have fought for fairness before, and we have won. And we're going to get to work, and we're going to organize like we've never done before. We're going to push for real policies, real protection, and real leadership. So let's build the Canada of the future. Let's build the kind of Canada that we're going to be proud to leave to our kids and to our grandkids. And let's, for the love of God, kick some ass for the working class, my friends. Solidarity. Thank you all so much. Thank you. But now I couldn't be more honored than to welcome to the stage some of Canada's strongest voices in the labour movement, leaders who I'm so proud to stand beside day after day. They are on the front lines of this fight every single day. And they're going to be here to help us unpack the real impacts of the escalating U.S. tariffs, not just on jobs, but on communities, on public services, and the future of our economy. And they're here to talk about what we need from our government, not just to resist the economic attacks, but to seize the moment to create real and lasting opportunities. So my friends, join me in welcoming to the stage our panel of labour leaders, Patrick Campbell, the Canadian Regional Director of the International Union of Operating Engineers. Patrick. Rebecca Caron, the President of the United Society of Professionals. Sharon D'Souza, the National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. And Mark Hennessy. Mark Hennessy, Special Assistant to the National President, UFCW Canada. Welcome.
All right, welcome to the stage, my friends.
Thanks for having us.
So we are going to start off with Mark Hennessy from the United Food and Commercial Workers. Mark, the question that we have for you is, based on the recent and proposed U.S. trade tariffs, including increases to vehicle, steel, and aluminum, coupled with constant threat of tariffs on manufacturing and the agri-food exports that are hitting Canadian workers hard, we know that these measures are already leading to job losses, to plant slowdowns, to growing uncertainty in key regions. What do unions need from the federal government right now to stop the bleed, both in terms of immediate response to U.S. trade actions, as well as longer-term industrial policy that protects workers in these critical sectors?
Thanks, Bea. Just for some context on how integrated our food system is, we have this, just as one example, 3.5 million piglets are sent from Manitoba each year to the state of Iowa, where they're then grown and harvested and then processed. But what happens is there's, things like hams will then go to Mexico, then back to the US, then back to Canada, and vice versa, all throughout the entire system. So much like auto parts, could face that compounding tariff situation if tariffs were applied there. And the other part of this is that UFCW has 10,000 members in pork processing alone. And they're all in places that are very rural, very small communities who once they're affected, it means that the entire community is affected. It's almost like the old company town sort of model. So as export opportunities close, we export about 70% of pork alone, right, of what we produce, meaning that if we had no export opportunities, we would not be able to eat our way out of that situation. Right now, we've kind of dodged a bullet with the U.S. sort of agreeing that they won't put any tariffs on the stuff protected by CUSMA, which includes quite a bit of the food. However, just the threat alone that remains has already paused any expansion and all investment. So we had expansions happening in a lot of plants that are all completely paused at this time. We are, however, affected by the Chinese tariffs in canola particularly, and we hear that they're now threatening pork specifically as well. But back to the question, apologies, is in terms of an immediate response, we need to stay the course on counter tariffs. So every tariff applied to us, we need to counter with a tariff right back, but we need to do so in a way where we're not escalating the situation. So a tariff on strawberries is just a tariff on strawberries, not a tariff on strawberries and something else. Because as you know, once you start to dig your heels in or you get into a real trade war, it starts to become difficult to find your way out and to find that resolve. So that's one. We need investment, but in this scenario, that means government investment, because private sector investment is already stopped, right? Even just on the threats, and we see that with the markets already. So we need huge government investment, like some of the monies that were already announced for the auto sector and so on. We need to modernize EI with lower qualification thresholds and longer benefits. The work sharing program in EI is going to be used quite a bit. It's already being used in our canola seed crushing plants right now as they start to face layoffs due to the tariffs that they've already been hit with. And then in the long term, I think the panel before us had already said it, but we need to diversify our markets. We've been here time and time again with the U.S. in particular, and then as soon as we resolve it or as soon as the U.S. backs off or what have you, that's it. We stop talking about diversifying our markets. And I don't think we can do that anymore. We cannot be dependent on just one other country. And then the other thing I would just say is just poultry and dairy are currently the two areas that are still protected by supply management, but we see that chipped away at in every single trade negotiation. We keep losing more and more of that protection. And so we need a real lens of making sure that good union jobs, good jobs overall in Canada are protected in these trade negotiations. And I think we should consider using some of the ILO's sustainable goals on decent work and then add to that and really take the lens a little further and looking at the entire supply chain so that we're not undercutting jobs in Canada when we're opening opportunities to cheaper labor markets for corporations.
Thank you for that, Mark. And it's fair to say that your members' jobs in terms of the agri-food and food manufacturing is literally in every province in this country, is it not?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Sharon, your members have such an important task in terms of the important public services that they provide to Canadians day in and day out. What we want to know from you is that, when trade disruptions hit, public services are often the very last line of defense that we see. And yet, they're very rarely treated as part of an economic recovery strategy. So in past trade crises, we've seen increased demands on everything from EI claims processing to mental health supports, but very little in targeted investments in workers delivering those very services that we all rely on. How can unions shift the conversation so that government treats public services as core economic infrastructure, essentially to stabilizing communities, supporting displaced workers, and rebuilding back stronger in face of global economic volatility?
Well, that's a mouthful. But what I can start by saying is this, first of all, we need to keep public services public. Do we all agree? We need to have an honest conversation. And right now, we're talking about our sovereignty. So we see politicians going out there and saying, yay, we're Canadian, we have a universal healthcare system. What's missing from that statement is the fact that we're starving those public services. And we have to have that honest conversation. As unions, we have a social, a inherent power of influence. And so whether it's at a municipal, provincial, federal, territorial, because we got to keep in mind, we have unionized members up in the north, and I don't mean north of Sudbury, I'm talking about the greater north. And we need to recognize, regardless of where a person is, in a rural community or anywhere in Canada, they should be having access to the same kind of public services. So when we're having these conversations, what kind of investment are these municipalities, provinces, territories, and the federal government going to commit to? Because the answer cannot be contracting out. We know it doesn't work and it's extremely costly. The Phoenix Pay System, billions of dollars has been spent down the drain on a product that wasn't created by federal public sector workers, and it doesn't work. So now we have to look at how are they investing in these public services. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the frontline workers that actually protect us. We're talking about those who are responsible for the borders. I don't know if you know, but CBSA has been underfunded. There's a gap between 2,000 and 3,000 workers, frontline workers to patrol our borders. The other narrative is in regards to who should be doing that work. It should be those that are trained to do it. Right now, there's a discussion of using RCMP and actual provincial police, and that's not right. They're not trained to do this work. Putting out drones and putting out Black Hawk helicopters will not take the place of border service officers who are frontline workers. We also have those who inspect our food. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's been cuts to those inspectors. The deregularization of what's happened in the United States means more than ever the food that comes from the US needs to be inspected. So what is the investment that Canada's going to make? What is the investment these provinces and territories are going to make? And it can't be empty promises any longer. The public system in itself is holding on by a thread. And so that investment has to be made. Also, I want to point out that these different bodies can be leaders as an employer. This work does not have to be done in urban centers. It can be done remotely. We have to recognize that when you're looking at an economy in which the private sector is hit, we know public service jobs are a way to balance that economy. And so the growth of the public service is going to be key. So what's the plan? Right now, we're in the middle of a federal election. What has any party brought out as a plan? And I don't mean just a plan to take on the tariffs. I mean a plan in which we have a vision and a future where our young people coming up will say, you know what, I'm not just going to survive, I'm going to live. And what does that future look like? Where our seasoned workers who are now retired know that they have security and their public services are protected. So when we're looking at this in a global space, everyone, it's not just the unions, it's every single person has to be fighting to ensure that public services are there, and whichever party is going to lead us is going to have a plan, because it can't just be about increasing the manufacturing section of our economy. It has to be, how do we grow the public services to build on the quality of life? And so I hope, B, that we hear about the platform soon enough, and we recognize that cutting public service is not the way to go.
Thank you for that important message on public services, and it's a good reminder that we should be asking the parties what their position is on investing in public services that we're relying on. Rebecca, many of your members work in the energy industry, and we often talk about job loss due to layoffs and plant closures, but we do see another opportunity or another worrisome trend, another cost of the trade uncertainty, and that's the potential jobs that we should be getting that we may not be getting. Investors are holding back on building new manufacturing capacity. They're holding back on clean tech facilities, on food processing plants in Canada because of the uncertainty being raised by the trade instability, and there's a clear lack of an industrial strategy. So how can unions push government to move beyond being reactive and commit to long-term strategies that not only attract investment, but also help Canada realize its full potential to build the long-term needs of workers, communities, and our planet?
Thank you. So I think it's important for us to remember that when it comes to energy and the supporting of communities, long-term planning is absolutely essential. That means the governments have to have vision, and frankly, they have to have the guts to see these projects through. And so when we take a look at history, we go back to 2006, where the government had decided to expand the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station for an additional 4 units. And then we had a recession in 2008, at which time we saw layoffs in manufacturing, forestry, pulp and paper. Those layoffs turned into plant shutdowns. Governments got scared, the demand lessened, and they started selling excess power to the United States. So as a result, they decided to put the kibosh on the Darlington B expansion. However, the economy rebounded fairly quickly, as it sometimes tends to do, but what we didn't get back was that critical piece of long-term planning infrastructure into the energy sector. And so now, over a decade later, we are starting to get back on track. But if the governments had stayed the course that they had set, decades ago, we would be 20 years ahead of where we should have been, and we would have at least 3,000 solid, good union-paying jobs supporting the economy. And we would also be burning a lot less gas to power the province. And so that's why it's important for us to look at this and where we are exactly today. So there is a likelihood we are going to have another recession. But the difference between then and now is that the demand is not going anywhere. And so we still need to electrify our economy. And if we are going to build things in Canada and we are going to grow, right, as we need to do, we need to attract investment in value-added production, but we will need low-cost, non-emitting energy. And so that's why vision and long-term planning is key. And governments matter in this, because private sector only cares about their own profits and their money. But the governments can afford to do this planning long-term and prioritize what we need over short-term profits. That is the goal. And so, big picture-wise, how do we push the government to make this a priority? So as representatives in the energy sector, workers know better than anyone else what we need. So pushing for these investments in the future and applying pressure to the governments when they get cold feet, as they sometimes do. And so when we talk about long-term planning, it has to go beyond the current government. But the priorities of the people and of the workers invested in these sectors and in society don't change. So it's about planning for the economy of the future, so leveraging the power of the unions, the power of our memberships, and forcing our governments to make these long-term plans. Because as I said earlier, we'd be 20 years ahead of where we are today had we been able to stop governments
from doing what they had originally set out to do.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Patrick, your members know infrastructure inside and out in terms of building up Canada. We know that roughly 3/4 of Canada's exports still currently flow through the United States, not just to the US markets, but flow through the US. Infrastructure, ports, pipelines to reach the rest of the world. That dependence leaves Canadian workers, quite frankly, vulnerable to this trade-exposed volatility, and over foreign policy that we, quite frankly, don't control. We're at the whim of whatever the last tweet is coming out of the White House. So what kinds of infrastructure investments, particularly in transportation and ports and in energy corridors, are going to be needed to get Canadian goods to access Tidewater directly and to reduce our reliance on the US?
Thank you for the question, B. So for the audience, the International Union of Operating Engineers, we represent crane operators, heavy equipment operators, power engineers, and we work with our brothers and sisters in the building trades to build all of that infrastructure that B had mentioned there. But I think right now, at the point we're at, the world is watching how it is we're going to react to this situation. And I think the best course of action is swift and decisive direction from the federal government to send a clear message that they are supporting infrastructure in Canada that is not headed south of the border. And a perfect example of that is our iron ore mine in Baffinland. So it's in the far north. The north has been a subject of much discussion with respect to defense, with respect to resources. So this is a mine that has the purest iron ore anywhere in the world. The mine is organized by IUOE Local 793, and of the close to 900 members working in this iron ore mine, more than 300 of those are local community members. And so it's really important for Canadians and the people in this room to understand that when we're talking about resource development, that is not in isolation to our obligations and commitments to the environment, our commitments to reconciliation, and our commitments to the Canadian citizens. And so the training that goes into the community to make sure that there's full and meaningful participation has to be, I think, touted as an example of how it's done. And the very first step that Local 793 took was to take community elders from the community down to our training facility in Morrisburg, Ontario, to view the facility to make sure they understood where community members were going to. The next step, the community members themselves would come down. I had the real privilege of attending that training facility with MP Eidelout, and we had the opportunity to go through a graduating class of those students and to see the pride on their faces and to see the facility. I mean, when we talk about training, they've gone to the extent of having a country kitchen on site because, you know, being taken out of community can be a very daunting task for some people. And so every step was taken to make sure that, you know, the level of comfort was there so they could focus on the task at hand. And so, I mean, it's those kinds of projects that we have to get behind, show support of. So that project now, at 4.6 million tons of iron ore being produced, represents over 20% of the GDP of Nunavut. And they're now looking to expand the Steensby Railway. So this is 150 kilometers of rail in the far north that is going to be able to expand that iron ore mine capacity to over 18 million tons. So the impacts that that's having on the community, the entire community, on the country, but the message that that sends to the world and to the US, getting behind projects like that, getting clean iron ore out to the world markets through ports. I think those are the kinds of messages that we need to be sending sooner rather than later. So that's my view on it.
That sounds absolutely amazing. How can Canada, Patrick, use its energy strengths? We are strong on energy, not just to meet our own obligation and long-term needs, but how do we actually use that as leverage in trade and industrial negotiations with the US? Do you have thoughts on that? You have a lot of members in that particular field.
I think the key with respect to whether it's pipelines, whether it's transmission lines, whether it's nuclear energy, our infrastructure that we're constructing, the absolute key to that infrastructure is going to be making sure that the infrastructure is covered by project labor agreements. And project labor agreements are going to make sure that the benefits that are being reaped from that infrastructure are going to the communities that infrastructure is going through. And we have seen that, the statistics are out. We have seen that in British Columbia, where they spent over $14 billion of citizens' money on infrastructure in British Columbia, and they did so in conjunction with the BC building trades under project labor agreements. And in the province of British Columbia, Indigenous engagement in construction is around 4%. Female engagement in construction is around 4.5%. The statistics that came out of these PLAs covering $14 billion worth of infrastructure work had those two underrepresented groups at almost 15% in both instances.
That's impressive.
But the real testament there is that it's not simply the percentage of the workforce. That was reflected back as a percentage of the hours worked on these projects. And that's the real test. It's not enough just to hire someone day one, have them as a statistic, and then have there not be meaningful employment on that project. And so the key there is having a stakeholder at the table, like the building trades, like the International Union of Operating Engineers, to ensure that those commitments are held to account. And the only way you do that is under a project labor agreement.
Thank you for that. That's a really important discussion to have and to, again, highlight why those project labor agreements are so important and why we need to be championing that. Mark, can you talk us through the interprovincial trade barrier issue? I know we hear about this all the time, and to hear some politicians speak about the issue, it seems if we could just tear down those interprovincial trade barriers, we'd solve the problem. Tell us what the issue is at hand here for labor.
Well, I think the biggest issue is the fact that every time that we have that discussion, the discussion is about removing all the exceptions that are in considered barriers, some of those being job protection, some of those being crown corporations, and so on and so forth. So I don't like it in that area. I think what should take place is maybe more of a tripartite process where all voices are at the table, and that it should be ongoing, right? Not just for the discussion or the negotiations, but it should be set up in a way that it's permanent, where it's always reviewing and analyzing the effects